question is the motion be agreed. The Honourable Dr Brian Walker.
Thank you, Acting President. Referral to the Legislation Committee. Now, I'm going to put into some kind of practice here that which you should do on the firing range, and that is actually make sure that the few bullets you use actually hit the target, rather than spraying a huge amount of ammunition around about anything and everything. So there are a few points which would merit the careful consideration of the referral to the committee. And I would point out three particular details. We've got, first of all, as an overarching issue, a very complex bill that no one could, in their remotest mind, suggest this is a simple bill. It's predicated upon, these are the simple findings of the Law Association review, and we have an explanatory memorandum which is larger than the actual bill. It is a complex bill. And for that alone, it ought to be referred, but I'll defer that to another point. There are three main areas where I would suggest that we ought to give careful consideration to referral to the committee. Three areas regard trust, the detail, and the actual consultation process. Now, trust, as we all know, as parents and as children, trust is something which is earned with difficulty and lost with ease. And it is important that we respect trust within the passage of this bill, because once we've lost trust, then everything is to be doubted. And I do wish that the points I make are brought to my respected colleague, the Minister, for careful consideration, because I appreciate that the opinion has been given that this will not be referred to the Legislation Committee. And I would suggest to you that this is actually a wrong decision. And one of the reasons it is a wrong decision is because it demands that we earn trust. Now, when I'm thinking about the originator of the bill, the Minister, I'm thinking about the level of veracity that I can give to the individual. Now, as a trainer of young doctors and medical students, I give an aphorism, and that aphorism is really quite simple. You have a patient who is in front of you. Doesn't really matter who, what, where, when, why, how. Everything that patient says has to be believed 100%. And then, with the next breath, I say, and everything that patient says must be disbelieved. So we'll take on board everything that a patient says and believe that, but we will check everything and seek to establish the veracity of what the patient is actually saying. For example, as a simple example, I've come with a sore throat. Now, the doctor may be thinking, sore throat, waste of time, get out of here. What we need to establish is what are you really here for, the hidden agenda. It's an essential part of medicine. And then we find out that he's actually quite concerned about the throat because his friend, who just died of leukemia, his symptoms started with a sore throat. Could he have the same thing? Is it catchable? Someone else may be wanting to travel tomorrow to an important meeting over $1 billion to be transferred and needs to be sure he can speak at that meeting as the main person. So the sore throat is irrelevant. It's the communication behind that. Trust what he says is sore throat. No, you're not going to get penicillin and Panadol. You're going to get a proper examination and see what's really going on. And this is the aspect of veracity in the clinical context. So I'm believing what's really being said. But it has to be said, and I regret to have to say this, but I disbelieve the Minister. And why would I disbelieve the Minister? Let me just take an example here. At the last paragraph of the second reading of the Minister is that finally, pursuant to Standing Order 1261, I advise that this bill is a uniform legislation bill. It is a bill that ratifies or gives effect to an intergovernmental agreement to which the government of the state is a party. That statement demands a referral to the Uniform Legislation Committee, does it not? Demands it. There's no question about that. The bill was not referred because of the merits of the bill as what's the policy. It was referred because of the statement at that last paragraph. Well, the bottom of page 1. He says, this bill will bring the state closer in line with firearm legislation in other Australian jurisdictions and, in some instances, exceed some of the concepts within the NFA to better meet the public safety principles it proposes in Western Australia. It also implements or exceeds the majority of recommendations arising from the Law Reform Commission's report. This, members, is not a uniform legislation bill.
But it gives effect to a national agreement.
It does also give rise to the disagreement that this is actually a necessary referral, because the appropriate committee surely has been the Legislation Committee. It has been declared as a uniform bill.
Because it is.
And so the referral is, well, you could argue, I'll take that point there. I may have misinterpreted. I am actually a relatively junior in this chamber, so I'll believe you. But then the question is, why has it not been referred on for the other merits we've got there? Now, we look at Waypol in that same category, the earning the trust in the community. I don't think it can be doubted that the police do a wonderful job under unenviable circumstances, and they are to be respected. But there are exceptions to the rule. And I think this bill must stand above all question of doubt. And I'm sure you'd all agree with that, because the bill is actually a really important and, in fact, a well-written bill. But it needs to be looked at with rigour. Now, the briefing I had was actually quite distressing for me, because in all the briefings I have had, I have never yet found a briefing that quite so thoroughly insulted me and disrespected me, and indeed the other members of the briefing who were there. Now, you could ask how I know that, and I would tell you about body language and the verbs used, language used, attitudes that were expressed. It's unimportant. That's the way I felt. Now, I may be completely wrong, but I've been to quite a few briefings, and I've had a lot of consultation over 4 decades with people who have been trying all kinds of methods to tell me what is actually going on and are lying to their back teeth. So I think one of my skills is actually the ability to interpret what is being said and how it is being said. And if there's any doubt there, I do think questions arise, and we ought to take that further. Now, we'll look here at the detail, if you like. Let's move on to consultation next. Now, consultation is an interesting word. I was walking past some buildings here. This is regarding the need for the referral, so I'll refer you to that. And I quite agree with you. Thank you for pointing that out. But when we're talking here about the extent of consultation, I'm immediately drawn back to the discussions I had with the very same minister about the level of consultation for the Aboriginal Cultural Heritage Bill. We have been here before, have we not? When we had multiple... Which is why we need to have this referred to the committee to have a good look at it. I will. Now, the word that I saw there was boutique, a boutique unit for sale, which actually means small. A quality building, which means that they've actually got working air conditioning. And the example we've got of previous bills where words have been used to say this is a perfect bill, and it was plainly not. Because if we're going to bring this forward, and it's going to last for several decades, it's imperative upon us as good work people to make sure that the job we produce is perfect, or as near perfect as we can make it. We need to have pride in what we do, that the laws that come from this chamber here are actually above reproach, are of quality. Otherwise, we get things like bills coming through where they say that THC is associated with impairment, which is a blatant lie. We cannot tolerate lies in legislation, can we? We cannot tolerate legislation which is faulty. We do it well, or not at all. And the third area is the actual detail. And this refers specifically to the Legislation Committee and the referral to it. It's been said many times in this chamber to this amendment, it's an important committee. It's a very important committee. I'm told, as a member of that committee, I agree it's a very important committee. Now, we had, over the last term of Parliament, 14 bills were referred. Now, I think the Honourable Colin de Grusser said that every bill needs to be referred. And he pointed out how important it is that the bills that you could find in innocuous bills, you could find areas of improvement. So we've got things like we had the Sentence Administration Amendment Bill, just to take it at random, Criminal Procedure Amendment Bill, 14 of these bills, Electoral Amendment Bill, and then 14 in total for the 40th Parliament. In this current Parliament, 1. Sports and Entertainment Trust Bill, 1. Over 3 years. And that to a committee which everyone would agree is an important committee. And then the inference that this is the fact, and it is the fact, the inference that we have from this is that all the bills which have been brought forth before this chamber have been perfect, that the PCO has been perfect, that the minor amendments made in this chamber are actually perfectly good, and all is well. I doubt that. I think anyone with an open mind would also doubt that. So we have a pattern of inaction here, and I wonder why, in this term of Parliament, this pattern exists. Why? If all legislation ought to be reviewed competently, then the majority, while we might do a good job here, it's more efficient to send it to the committee for proper review for two reasons. One, we've got time to deal with it, and for the other, it cuts the time we spend in here, does it not? Now we have a perfectly good Law Reform Commission report which gave some very good recommendations, with which the shooters, I am reliably informed, were well pleased. You can't please everyone all the time, but the shooters were well pleased. And now we find that this bill, which purports to have put everything from that commission into legislation, with a few minor changes. And I've actually gone through the bill with a fine-tooth comb and compared it to the Law Reform Commission report. And I agree, 90%, well actually it's about 60%, but it comes to 85% of the bill has been transferred into legislation in this bill. So why do we find that 32,000 signatures appear on a petition demonstrating great concern? Now, we could actually say that if you're looking here at the star system in social media, for every star report you get, there's about 1/10 of what actually is felt in the public, the buying public. Only about 1/10 will give any comment or feedback on their purchase. If that was the case, then 32,000 people would have given a comment, had they had the nerve, the urge, which is about 20% of our voters. If that is the level of concern in the community, then we, as a Parliament, ought to do something which Parliaments should do all the time, and that is listen to the people and serve the people. And so, therefore, for these reasons, the need for a review of the consultation, to go into the detail and to establish trust, three very important reasons, I am recommending that this be taken back to the responsible authorities on the government side, and the consideration be again turned to referring this bill, as is appropriate, as is right, as is proper, to the Legislation Committee. That can report, as in due course it is bound to do, save us the trouble of going through every clause and holding up this bill on its passage, and allow us to be sure that what we present to the public matches the needs. We can all agree it's an important bill. We can all agree it must happen. We can all agree that the situation, say, in the US where there's rampant firearms and killings all over the place, we can all agree this is not what we want in our country here. But we can also all agree that where significant concerns have been raised by the people who are intimately involved with these at a personal, on a daily level, if sufficient people have given sufficient concern, then we, as representatives of the population, we must listen. We must respect. We must earn the trust of those people. And we can do that by referring that to the Legislation Committee. And I would recommend that task be done.